Every one of us has a gift. Maybe you have not discovered it yet, or perhaps you hide it from the world. Joseph Novak is a janitor in a corporate building. Every evening, he cleans empty offices. He mops the floors. He takes out the trash. Nobody notices him. He is like a shadow. But Joseph has a secret. When he is alone, he sings. His voice is beautiful, clear as a bell, full of emotion. One evening he thinks he is alone. He begins to sing an old song. He does not know that in the conference room sits the chief executive officer. The entire company leadership is there. Everyone suddenly falls silent. The meeting stops. The director stands up. He walks toward that voice. Can one moment change an entire life? If this story touches you, write in the comments where you are watching from and give it a like. This story deserves to be heard. Every one of us has a gift. Maybe you have not discovered it yet, or perhaps you hide it from the world. Joseph Novak is a janitor in a corporate building. Every evening he cleans empty offices. He mops the floors. He takes out the trash. Nobody notices him. He is like a shadow. But Joseph has a secret. When he is alone, he sings. His voice is beautiful, clear as a bell, full of emotion. One evening he thinks he is alone. He begins to sing an old song. He does not know that in the conference room sits the chief executive officer. The entire company leadership is there. Everyone suddenly falls silent. The meeting stops. The director stands up. He walks toward that voice. Can one moment change an entire life? If this story touches you, write in the comments where you are watching from and give it a like. This story deserves to be heard. Joseph Novak had been invisible for so long that he barely remembered what it felt like to be seen. At 55 years old, he moved through the world like a ghost, present but unnoticed, his existence marked only by the clean floors and empty trash bins he left behind. The corporate tower where he worked stood 30 stories high in the heart of the city, all glass and steel and modern ambition, a monument to success that Joseph entered each evening through the service entrance in the back. He never used the front doors. Those were for the important people, the ones in suits who rushed past him without a glance, their minds on meetings and mergers and matters that men like Joseph could never touch. He did not mind. He had grown accustomed to invisibility. It was easier that way, safer, less painful than being noticed and found wanting. His shift began at 6 in the evening, after the bulk of the office workers had gone home, when the building settled into its evening quiet, and Joseph could move freely through the empty corridors with his cleaning cart. The cart was old, older than his employment here, its wheels squeaking softly as he pushed it from floor to floor. It held everything he needed for his work, the mops and buckets, the cleaning solutions that smelled of artificial lemon, the trash bags and paper towels, and all the small necessities of his trade. On the handle of the cart, secured with a rubber band that had long since lost its elasticity, was his identification badge. The photo showed a younger Joseph, his hair still dark, his face less lined with the weight of years and loss. He had been 47 when that photo was taken, newly hired, still adjusting to the reality of his diminished circumstances. 8 years had passed since then. 8 years of mopping the same floors, emptying the same trash bins, wiping down the same conference tables where decisions were made that would never include him. But Joseph did not complain. He was grateful for the work, for the steady paycheck that kept a roof over his head and food in his small apartment. He was grateful for the solitude of the evening shift, for the hours when he could work alone without the awkward encounters that came during the day, when office workers would sometimes pause and look at him with that particular mixture of pity and discomfort that people reserve for those who clean up after them. In the quiet hours after sunset, Joseph could almost pretend that the building belonged to him, that he was not merely the janitor, but the caretaker of something important, something that mattered. The building had become familiar to him in ways that went beyond the simple geography of its floors and rooms. He knew which offices stayed late, their occupants burning the midnight oil in pursuit of promotions and bonuses. He knew which conference rooms were used most frequently, their whiteboards covered in diagrams and charts that meant nothing to him but everything to those who drew them. He knew where the coffee stains accumulated, where people were careless with their trash, where the carpets wore thin from the endless traffic of ambitious feet. He knew the building's sounds too, the hum of the heating system in winter, the whisper of the air conditioning in summer, the distant ping of elevator bells, the occasional burst of laughter from a late working team. These sounds were his companions in the empty hours, familiar and somehow comforting in their predictability. But there was one sound that Joseph added to the building's evening symphony, a sound that no one else ever heard. When he was certain he was alone, truly alone, Joseph would sing. His voice would rise softly at first, tentative, testing the emptiness around him, and then growing stronger, more confident, filling the silent corridors with melodies that came from some deep place inside him, a place that remembered what it felt like to be more than invisible, more than just the man who cleaned the floors. Singing was Joseph's secret joy, his private rebellion against the smallness of his life. It was the one thing that remained entirely his own, untouched by loss or disappointment or the grinding routine of survival. When he sang, he was not a janitor. He was not a widower living alone in a one-bedroom apartment where every surface reminded him of absence. He was not a man whose dreams had withered like autumn leaves. When he sang, he was simply himself, Joseph, a man with a voice that could convey things his words never could, emotions too deep and complicated for ordinary conversation. He had always loved music. Even as a child growing up in a small town, the youngest of 4 brothers, Joseph had been drawn to melody and harmony in ways his family never quite understood. His father had been a practical man, a carpenter who measured success in straight lines and sturdy joints, who believed that a man's worth was determined by what he could build with his hands. Singing seemed frivolous to him, a waste of time that could be better spent learning a useful trade. But Joseph's mother had understood. She had a small radio in the kitchen that she would tune to the classical station while she cooked, and sometimes Joseph would find her humming along to the symphonies and operas that filled their home with impossible beauty. She never discouraged his singing. When his father complained about the noise, she would smile and say that every family needed at least one dreamer, one soul who could see beyond the immediate concerns of daily life. Joseph had carried that permission with him through the years, through school and early jobs, through the ordinary struggles of a young man trying to find his place in the world. He had sung in church choirs, had briefly considered music school before the cost, and his father's disapproval made it impossible. He had sung at weddings and funerals, his voice a gift he offered freely to mark the important moments in other people's lives. And then he had met Marie. Marie, who had heard him sing at a friend's wedding and had sought him out afterward, her eyes bright with interest, her smile genuine and warm. Marie, who had loved his voice from that very first moment, who had made him feel as though his gift mattered, as though he mattered. They had married within a year, a simple ceremony in the same church where they had met, and Joseph had sung to her as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. He remembered the feel of her in his arms, the way she had looked up at him with such complete happiness that he had felt for perhaps the only time in his life that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, exactly who he was supposed to be. Their life together had been modest but good. Joseph had worked steady jobs, nothing glamorous, but enough to pay the bills. Marie had worked, too, as a secretary at a law firm, and together they had built a comfortable existence, small in scope but rich in the ways that mattered. They had never had children, a source of quiet sadness that they rarely discussed, but they had each other, and that had been enough. In the evenings, after dinner, Marie would ask him to sing for her, and Joseph would oblige, his voice filling their small apartment with old songs and new ones, ballads and hymns, and sometimes just melodies he made up on the spot. She would close her eyes and listen, and Joseph would watch her face, seeing in her expression all the love and acceptance he had ever needed. Those had been the best years of his life. Looking back now from the distance of loss, Joseph could see how precious they had been, how fragile, how temporary all happiness proved to be. Marie had gotten sick 3 years ago. Cancer, the doctors said, using that word that seemed to drain all the color from the world. They had fought it together, through surgery and chemotherapy, and all the grinding misery of treatment that promised hope but delivered mostly suffering. Joseph had sung to her in the hospital, soft songs that would not disturb the other patients, melodies meant to comfort and soothe. Even when she was too weak to open her eyes, he believed she could hear him, that his voice reached her in whatever dim place the illness had taken her. She had died on a Tuesday morning in November, the sky outside her hospital window grey and heavy with approaching winter. Joseph had been holding her hand, had felt the moment when she slipped away, when the person he loved most in the world became simply a body, empty of everything that had made her Marie. He had not sung at her funeral. Could not. The grief had closed his throat, making speech difficult and song impossible. In the months that followed, Joseph had discovered that loss changes everything, even the things you think are permanent. The apartment they had shared became unbearable, every object a reminder of absence, every room echoing with memories that brought only pain. He had moved to a smaller place, taking only what he needed, leaving behind most of their furniture, their photographs, the accumulated evidence of their years together. It felt like a betrayal, but he could not bear to live surrounded by ghosts. His old job had disappeared during Marie's illness, the company downsizing while he was on family leave, and when he finally emerged from his grief enough to look for work, he found that the world had moved on without him. At 52, he was too old for many positions, too inexperienced for others, and too obviously broken for the rest. The janitor position at the corporate tower had been the only offer he received after months of searching. He had taken it gratefully, understanding that beggars could not afford pride. The work was hard physically, harder than anything he had done before, but it had the advantage of solitude. He did not have to pretend to be whole. He did not have to make small talk, or explain his circumstances, or endure the pitying looks of colleagues who knew his story. He could simply work, losing himself in the repetitive tasks, finding a kind of peace in the simplicity of cleaning. For 2 years after Marie's death, Joseph did not sing at all. The music had died with her, or so he believed. His voice felt like something that belonged to his old life, to the man he had been when he had someone to sing for. But then, one evening, working late on the 15th floor. He had found himself humming without thinking, an old melody that he and Marie had loved. The sound had surprised him, emerging unbidden, and for a moment he had felt such a sharp stab of grief that he had to stop and steady himself against a desk. But beneath the grief was something else, something that felt almost like relief. His voice was still there. The music was still there, waiting for him. After that night, Joseph began to sing again, but only when he was alone, only in the empty building where no one could hear him. It felt safer that way, private, a conversation between himself and the memory of Marie. He sang the songs she had loved, and sometimes he felt as though she was still listening, still closing her eyes in that particular way she had, still present in the music, even if she was gone from everything else. His voice had changed over the years. It was deeper now, richer, carrying the weight of experience and sorrow. But it was still strong, still true, still capable of expressing things that ordinary words could not touch. In the building, Joseph had made a few acquaintances, though he would not call them friends. There was Mrs. Svoboda, the evening receptionist, a woman in her 60s who manned the front desk until 8 o'clock each night. She always greeted Joseph kindly when he passed through the lobby, asking about his day in a way that suggested she actually cared about the answer. He appreciated her warmth, though he kept their conversations brief, unwilling to reveal too much of himself. There was also Mr. Dvorak, the security guard who monitored the cameras and checked the building each night before locking up. He was a large man, former military, with a gruff exterior that concealed a fundamentally decent nature. He and Joseph sometimes crossed paths during their rounds, exchanging nods and occasional comments about the weather or the building's quirks. These small interactions represented the entirety of Joseph's social life. He had no family nearby, his brothers scattered to different cities, their contact reduced to occasional phone calls that felt more obligatory than genuine. He had no close friends, the relationships from his old life having faded after Marie's death, people unsure how to talk to him, uncomfortable with his grief. He existed in a kind of isolation that was both chosen and imposed, lonely but safe, small but manageable. On this particular evening, the evening that would change everything, Joseph arrived at work at his usual time. The autumn air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. He entered through the service entrance, badging in with his worn identification card, and made his way to the janitor's closet on the ground floor where he stored his cart and supplies. The building was quieter than usual, many of the offices dark, the parking garage nearly empty. It was late in the quarter. That brief lull between major projects when people actually went home at reasonable hours. Joseph preferred these quiet nights. They gave him more time to work at his own pace, more freedom to sing if the mood struck him. He began on the 3rd floor, as was his custom, working his way methodically through the offices. He emptied trash bins, their contents the detritus of corporate life, crumpled papers and empty coffee cups, and the occasional forgotten lunch. He vacuumed the carpets, the machine's drone drowning out all other sound. He wiped down desks and conference tables, removing the fingerprints and coffee rings that accumulated during the day. The work was mindless in the best way, requiring just enough attention to keep him occupied, but not so much that he could not let his thoughts wander. As he worked, Joseph found himself thinking about Marie, as he often did. Today would have been her birthday. She would have been 53. He wondered what she would look like now, how she would have aged, whether the grey in her hair would have spread, or whether she would have colored it, as she sometimes threatened to do. He wondered if they would still be happy, if the comfortable routine of their life together would have continued, or whether, as some marriages do, they would have grown apart. He liked to think they would have stayed close, that the love between them was strong enough to weather time and change. But he would never know. That was the cruelest part of loss, he had learned. Not just the absence of the person, but the absence of all the futures that would never happen, all the years that would never be lived together. By 8:30, Joseph had finished the 3rd and 4th floors and was making his way up to the 5th. The building felt especially empty tonight. No lights burning in any of the offices he passed. No signs of the late working teams that sometimes occupied the conference rooms. He appreciated the solitude. It gave him permission to sing. He started softly, as he always did, humming first and then adding words to an old folk song that Marie had taught him. His voice echoed gently in the empty corridor, a sound that felt both melancholy and comforting. He was not performing. He was simply releasing something that needed to be released, giving voice to feelings that had no other outlet. He did not know that on the 20th floor, in the executive conference room, a meeting was taking place that would intersect with his small, invisible life in ways he could never have imagined. The executive conference room on the 20th floor was a study in controlled tension. Around the long mahogany table sat 12 people, each one representing a different division of the company, each one acutely aware that their careers hung in the balance of this meeting. At the head of the table sat Richard Krajicek, Chief Executive Officer, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his reputation for ruthlessness. At 58, he had built this company from a small startup into a corporate powerhouse, and he had done it by making hard decisions that other people avoided. Tonight's meeting was about the future, about expansion plans that would either cement the company's dominance or expose it to catastrophic risk. The presentations had been going on for 3 hours. Financial projections, market analyses, competitive assessments, all delivered with the polished confidence of people who knew their jobs depended on appearing certain even when certainty was impossible. Krajicek had listened to it all with his characteristic intensity, his dark eyes moving from speaker to speaker, his expression giving away nothing. He did not interrupt often, but when he did, his questions were surgical, cutting straight to the weaknesses in each argument, exposing the assumptions that did not hold up under scrutiny. The room had grown warm despite the air conditioning, the tension generating its own heat. Coffee cups littered the table, some empty, some half full and forgotten. Someone had ordered sandwiches hours ago, but they sat largely untouched on a side table, the bread beginning to curl at the edges. No one wanted to be seen eating while others were presenting. It would suggest a lack of focus, a lack of commitment to the mission. These were not the kind of people who allowed themselves to appear weak. Krajicek had just finished dismantling the marketing director's proposal for a new advertising campaign when he held up his hand for silence. The room immediately quieted, everyone alert to the possibility that he was about to render judgment. But instead of speaking, Krajicek tilted his head slightly, listening. His expression changed, just for a moment, from the hard focus of business to something else, something that looked almost like surprise. Then he heard it again. A voice, distant but clear, singing. The sound seemed to come from somewhere below them, drifting up through the building's ventilation system, or perhaps through the open door to the corridor. It was a male voice, rich and full of emotion, carrying a melody that Krajicek half recognized. Something old and beautiful and completely unexpected in this place of spreadsheets and strategy. The voice rose and fell, unhurried, each note pure and true. For a moment, no one in the room moved. They all heard it now, this impossible music interrupting their important meeting. Some of them looked annoyed, ready to dismiss it as an intrusion. Others looked confused, trying to understand where it was coming from. But Kryachek simply listened, his entire attention captured by that voice. He had not planned to stand up, had not consciously decided to leave the meeting, but he found himself rising from his chair, moving toward the door with a purposefulness that surprised even him. The voice was stronger in the corridor, clearer, and he could hear now that it was coming from below, perhaps several floors down. The song was in a Poo language he did not immediately recognize, something Slavic perhaps, the words less important than the emotion they carried. There was longing in that voice and sorrow, and something else that Kryachek could not quite name. Beauty, perhaps, pure, unguarded beauty. Behind him, he heard the confused murmurs of his executive team, uncertain whether they should follow or stay. He did not care. He walked to the stairwell, pushing open the heavy door and starting down. The voice grew stronger as he descended, leading him down floor after floor. On the 15th floor, he paused, listening, trying to pinpoint the exact location. The voice was very close now, just 1 or 2 floors below. He continued down to the 14th floor, then the 13th, and there, in the corridor, he saw a man pushing a cleaning cart. The man was maybe 55 or 60, wearing the dark blue uniform of the building's janitorial staff, his back to Kryachek as he mopped the floor. And he was singing, his voice filling the empty corridor with that same beautiful melody Kryachek had heard from 20 floors above. For a long moment, Kryachek simply stood there, watching and listening. The janitor had not noticed him yet, too absorbed in his work and his song. There was something unself-conscious about the way he sang, something that suggested he believed himself to be completely alone. This was not a performance. This was something private, something honest, a man expressing himself in the only way that mattered. The song came to a natural end, the final note hanging in the air for a moment, before fading into silence. The janitor stood still for a moment, as if gathering himself, and then he turned, ready to move his cart to the next section of corridor. That was when he saw Kryachek standing there, watching him. The change in the janitor's expression was immediate and painful to witness. The peace that had been on his face while he sang vanished, replaced by shock and then deep embarrassment. His face flushed red, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, clearly at a loss for words. Kryachek realized in that moment that he had no idea what to say either. He had followed the voice down 13 floors without thinking about what would happen when he found its source. What did you say to a janitor who sang like an angel? How did you explain that you had abandoned an important meeting, left your entire executive team waiting, because you needed to know who possessed that voice? The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. The janitor's hand gripped the handle of his cleaning cart as if it were an anchor, something solid to hold on to in this sudden, surreal moment. His eyes darted away from Kryachek's face, unable to maintain eye contact, the instinctive response of someone who had learned to make himself invisible. Kryachek saw the man's identification badge hanging from the Janitor cart. Joseph Novak. The name meant nothing to him, though he supposed he employed hundreds of people whose names he did not know. People who kept the building running, who emptied the trash and cleaned the floors and fixed the broken things, all invisible, all performing essential work that no one acknowledged. When had he last really looked at a janitor? When had he last considered them as actual people with lives and dreams and talents that had nothing to do with cleaning? Finally, Krajicek found his voice. "I heard you singing," he said simply. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, less commanding than usual, almost tentative. Joseph Novak nodded, but did not speak. His embarrassment was so profound that Krajicek could feel it radiating off him like heat. The poor man clearly wished he could disappear, wished he had never opened his mouth to sing, wished he were anywhere but here under the scrutiny of the chief executive officer. "That was an extraordinary voice," Krajicek continued, trying to find words that would not sound patronizing. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" Joseph swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He began, his voice rough, then cleared his throat and tried again. "I just sing sometimes, while I work. I am sorry if I disturbed you." "You did not disturb me," Krajicek said, and realized it was true. The voice had not been a disturbance. It had been something else entirely. A revelation, perhaps. A reminder that beauty could exist in unexpected places. "Have you had training? Professional training?" Joseph shook his head. "No, sir. Just church choir when I was younger. Nothing professional." The conversation felt surreal, standing in this empty corridor, the chief executive officer and the janitor, connected by nothing more than a song. Krajicek knew he should return to his meeting, knew that 12 people were waiting for him upstairs, that important decisions needed to be made, that time was money, and he was wasting both. But he could not seem to make himself leave. "That song you were singing," he said. "What was it?" "It is an old folk song," Joseph said quietly. "My wife taught it to me. It is about," he paused, searching for the right words, "about missing someone, about love that continues even after loss." Something in the way Joseph said it made Krajicek look at him more carefully. He saw now what he had missed before, the lines of sorrow etched into the man's face, the sadness that lived behind his eyes. This was not just a janitor who happened to sing. This was a man who had known real loss, real pain, and who had found in music some way to express what words could not contain. Before Krajicek could respond, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from his assistant, probably wondering where he had gone, whether the meeting should continue without him. The reminder of the waiting room, the waiting decisions, should have pulled him back to his responsibilities, should have ended this strange encounter. But instead, Krajicek found himself saying something he had not planned, something that came from an impulse he did not fully understand. "Mr. Novak," he said, "I would like to talk to you more about your singing. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow? In my office?" Joseph looked up at him, confusion clear on his face. "I do not understand," he said. "Why would you want to meet with me?" "Because," Krajicek said, "that voice deserves to be heard. By more people than just the empty corridors of this building." Joseph stared at him for a long moment, clearly uncertain whether this was real or some kind of strange dream. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Yes, sir," he said, "if you wish." 10 o'clock, Krajicek said. "My office is on the 30th floor. My assistant will expect you." And with that, he turned and walked back toward the stairwell, already pulling out his phone to text his team that he was returning. He did not look back, did not see the expression of complete bewilderment on Joseph Novak's face, did not see the way the janitor stood frozen in place for a full minute after he left, trying to comprehend what had just happened. As Krajicek climbed back up to the 20th floor, his mind was already racing ahead, already forming ideas and possibilities that had nothing to do with the meeting he was returning to. He had heard something tonight that he could not ignore, a voice that beautiful, a talent that pure. It seemed wrong that it should be hidden away, heard only by empty offices and abandoned corridors. By the time he reached the conference room, he had made a decision. He did not yet know all the details, did not yet understand the full implications, but he knew that something had shifted tonight, that he had found something unexpected and important. And Richard Krajicek had not built his success by ignoring opportunities when they presented themselves, no matter how unusual the package they arrived in. Joseph did not sleep that night. He lay in his small bed in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter over and over in his mind. Had it really happened? Had the chief executive officer really asked him to come to his office? And if so, why? The questions circled endlessly, giving him no peace. He rose before dawn, exhausted but unable to rest, and made himself coffee that he barely tasted. The morning hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. He tried to distract himself with small tasks, washing dishes that were already clean, organizing closets that did not need organizing, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. But nothing worked. The anxiety built steadily as the clock moved toward 10, a pressure in his chest that made breathing difficult. At 9:15, Joseph dressed in the only suit he owned, a dark grey outfit he had purchased for Marie's funeral and had not worn since. It was slightly loose on him now. He had lost weight in the years since her death, but it was respectable. He knotted his tie with shaking hands, checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror, and saw a man who looked terrified. What was he doing? He was a janitor. He had no business going to the executive floor, no business meeting with someone like Richard Krajicek. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that would end in embarrassment and possibly the loss of his job. But he had said he would go, and Joseph was not a man who broke his word. At 9:45, he left his apartment and took the bus to the corporate tower. He entered through the front doors this time, not the service entrance, and immediately felt out of place. The lobby was filled with well-dressed people, moving with purpose and confidence, everyone seeming to know exactly where they belonged. Joseph approached the reception desk where Mrs. Svoboda sat, her eyes widening in surprise when she recognized him. "Joseph," she said, clearly taken aback by his suit. "What are you doing here during the day? Is everything all right?" "I have a meeting," he said quietly, the words feeling absurd even as he spoke them. "With Mr. Krajicek." Mrs. Svoboda's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "With the chief executive?" She looked at him with new curiosity, perhaps even concern. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I do not think so," Joseph said, though he was not certain of anything. "He asked me to come." She processed this information for a moment, then picked up her phone and spoke briefly to someone. After hanging up, she gave Joseph directions to the 30th floor and wished him good luck with an expression that suggested he would need it. The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt interminable. Joseph stood alone in the polished steel box, watching the numbers climb, his reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls. Who was this man in the suit, this person who had meetings with executives? He barely recognized himself. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that spoke of wealth and power in every detail. The furniture was expensive, the art on the walls original, the carpet so thick that Joseph's footsteps made no sound. A young woman sat at a large desk, perfectly groomed and professional, her smile polite but measuring as Joseph approached. "Mr. Novak," she said, checking her computer. "Mr. Kryachek is expecting you. Please have a seat. He will be with you shortly." Joseph sat on a leather chair that was probably worth more than everything in his apartment combined. He kept his hands folded in his lap, afraid to touch anything, hyper-aware of his own presence in this space. Other people came and went, all of them dressed better than him, all of them moving with easy confidence through this world that he did not belong to. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Joseph watched the clock on the wall, a sleek modern thing that marked time with silent precision. 10 o'clock came and went. Then 10:15. Joseph wondered if he should leave, if this had all been some kind of joke. But before he could decide, the assistant looked up and smiled at him. "Mr. Kryachek will see you now," she said, gesturing toward a set of large doors. Joseph stood on unsteady legs and walked toward the doors, his heart hammering so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. He pushed open the door and stepped into an office that was larger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the buildings spreading out below like a miniature landscape. The desk was massive, clearly custom-made, and behind it sat Richard Kryachek, looking exactly as commanding as he had the night before. "Come in, Mr. Novak," Kryachek said, rising from his chair and gesturing to a seating area away from the desk, a set of comfortable chairs arranged around a low table. "Please, sit down." Joseph crossed the expanse of carpet, feeling like it took forever to reach the chairs. He sat carefully, perched on the edge of the seat, his back straight, his hands still folded in his lap. Kryachek sat across from him, his posture relaxed in a way that Joseph envied. For a moment, neither man spoke. Kryachek seemed to be studying him, but not unkindly, his expression thoughtful. Joseph kept his eyes lowered, unable to maintain eye contact with someone so far above him in every measurable way. "Thank you for coming," Kryachek said finally. "I imagine this is all very strange for you." "Yes, sir," Joseph managed to say. "I do not understand why I am here." "Because of your voice," Kryachek said simply. "I have not been able to stop thinking about it since last night. That kind of talent is rare, Mr. Novak. Exceptionally rare." Joseph did not know what to say to that. He was not accustomed to compliments, especially not about his singing. That was something he did for himself, for Marie's memory, not for recognition or praise. "I am just a janitor," he said quietly. "I sing while I work. That is all." "That is not all," Kryachek said, leaning forward slightly. "What I heard last night was not just someone singing while they work. What I heard was artistry. Real, genuine talent. The kind that should not be hidden away in empty corridors." Joseph felt his face flush with embarrassment and confusion. He did not think of his singing as artistry. It was simply something he did, something he needed to do. A way of keeping Marie's memory alive and his own spirit from completely breaking. "Tell me about yourself," Kryachek said. "Your background. How did you come to work here?" The question was so unexpected that Joseph found himself answering honestly, the words coming out before he could think better of it. He told Kryachek about Marie, about her death, about losing his old job and struggling to find new work. He talked about the years of grief, the loneliness, the way singing had been the only thing that kept him connected to who he used to be. He did not mean to say so much, did not mean to reveal so much of himself, but something about Kryachek's intent listening made it difficult to hold back as Joseph spoke. He watched Kryachek's face for signs of pity or discomfort, the reactions he had grown accustomed to when people learned about his loss. But Kryachek's expression remained steady, attentive, respectful. When Joseph finished, there was a long silence. "I am sorry for your loss," Kryachek said finally, and the words sounded genuine, not performative. "That kind of grief, it changes everything." Joseph nodded, not trusting his voice. "Yes, sir," he said after a moment. "It does." "But you kept singing," Kryachek said, "even after losing her, even when it must have been painful." "I had to," Joseph said simply. "It was the only way I could still feel close to her. The only way I could express what I felt. Words were not enough." Kryachek nodded as if he understood, though Joseph doubted that someone in his position could truly comprehend what it meant to lose everything. "Mr. Novak," Kryachek said, "I asked you here because I believe your talent should not be wasted. I do not yet know exactly what form that should take, but I wanted to meet with you, to understand who you are and what you want. So I am asking you now, if you could do anything with your voice, what would it be?" The question caught Joseph completely off guard. No one had ever asked him what he wanted, not in years. His life had become about survival, about getting through each day, about managing his grief and loneliness. Wanting anything beyond that seemed like a luxury he could not afford. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I never thought about it. I am 55 years old. I am a janitor. People like me do not get to want things." "That is not true," Kryachek said firmly. "Everyone gets to want things. Age does not matter. Circumstance does not matter. Talent matters. And you have talent, Mr. Novak. Real talent." Joseph looked up at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or cruel humor, but found only sincerity. It was almost harder to accept than pity would have been. "What are you suggesting?" Joseph asked carefully. "I do not know yet," Kryachek admitted. "But I want to find out. With your permission, I would like to have you work with a vocal coach, someone who can assess your range and abilities professionally, someone who can help us understand what is possible." Joseph's mind reeled. A vocal coach? The very idea seemed absurd. Something from a different life, a different world. "Why would you do this for me?" Joseph asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since the moment Kryachek had appeared in the corridor last night. "You do not know me. I am nobody." "Because talent like yours should not be hidden," Kryachek said. "And because I built this company on the principle that extraordinary things can come from unexpected places." "You remind me of that." Joseph sat in stunned silence, trying to process what was being offered. A vocal coach, professional assessment, things that cost money, that took time, that suggested a future he had never dared to imagine. But alongside the shock was fear, deep and instinctive. What if he tried and failed? What if this turned out to be a humiliation, proof that he was nothing more than a janitor who sang to himself? What if opening himself up to hope only led to more disappointment, more loss? "I do not know if I can do this," Joseph said quietly, his voice shaking. "I am afraid." "Of what?" Kryachek asked gently. "Of failing," Joseph said. "Of being foolish, of wanting something and discovering it was never possible in the first place. Better to want nothing than to want something and lose it." "Is that how you have been living?" Kryachek asked. "Wanting nothing?" Joseph met his eyes and nodded slowly. "Yes. It is safer that way." Kryachek leaned back in his chair, considering Joseph's words. "I understand that instinct," he said. "After loss, after pain, we protect ourselves by lowering our expectations, by not reaching for anything that might hurt us. But is that really living, Mr. Novak? Or is it just existing?" The question hit Joseph harder than he expected. Was he living or just existing? He knew the answer already. He had been existing for 3 years, going through the motions, surviving but not thriving, keeping himself small and safe and numb. Marie would have hated to see him like this. She had always encouraged him to be brave, to take chances, to believe in himself even when he could not see the reason to. What would she say if she could see him now, offered an opportunity, and too afraid to take it? She would tell him to try. She would tell him that hiding was not the same as healing. She would tell him that his voice was a gift, and gifts were meant to be shared. "I will think about it," Joseph said finally, though even as he spoke he could feel his resistance weakening. "That is all I ask," Kryachek said. "Take some time, but not too much time. Opportunities have a way of disappearing if we wait too long to seize them." Joseph nodded and stood, understanding that the meeting was ending. Kryachek stood as well and extended his hand. Joseph took it, feeling the firm grip, the confidence in that simple gesture. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Novak," Kryachek said. "I will have my assistant contact you in a few days. Whether you decide to move forward or not, I want you to know that what I heard last night mattered. You mattered." Joseph left the office in a daze, barely registering the elevator ride down or the walk through the lobby. Mrs. Svoboda called out to him as he passed, but he did not hear her, too lost in his own thoughts. He walked for blocks without destination, his mind churning with possibilities and fears. By the time he reached a small park, he was exhausted. He sat on a bench and stared at nothing, trying to understand what had just happened to his carefully controlled life. For 3 years he had kept everything simple, predictable, safe. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. No complications, no risks, no chances for more pain. And now this man, this powerful stranger, had appeared and offered him something that felt like hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Joseph pulled out his phone, an old model that he used only for basic calls and texts. He scrolled through his contacts, most of them outdated, people he no longer spoke to. He found his brother Martin's number and stared at it for a long time before pressing call. The phone rang 4 times before Martin answered, his voice surprised. "Joseph? Is everything all right?" "Yes," Joseph said, then corrected himself. "No, I do not know. Martin, I need to talk to someone." There was a pause. Then Martin's voice came back warmer, concerned. "Of course. What is going on?" Joseph told him everything, about singing in the corridor, about Kryachek hearing him, about the meeting, about the offer of a vocal coach. The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and confused. When he finished, there was a long silence. "Martin, are you there?" Joseph asked. "I am here," Martin said. "I am just trying to understand. The head of your company wants to help you become a professional singer." "It sounds crazy when you say it like that," Joseph admitted. "It sounds crazy no matter how you say it," Martin said. But there was no mockery in his voice, only wonder. "Joseph, this is extraordinary. This is the kind of thing that does not happen to real people." "I know," Joseph said. "That is why I am afraid it is a mistake. Or a joke. Or something that will end badly. Or," Martin said carefully, "it could be real. It could be a genuine opportunity. It could be the universe telling you that it is time to stop hiding." Joseph closed his eyes, feeling tears threatening. "Marie used to say that singing was my gift, that I should share it with people. I never believed her." "Maybe she was right," Martin said gently. "Maybe this Krajicek sees what Marie saw. What we all saw, but you never could." "What if I fail?" Joseph whispered. "What if I try, and I am not good enough?" "Then you fail," Martin said simply, "and you survive it the way you have survived everything else." "But Joseph, what if you do not fail? What if you are good enough? What if this changes your life? Can you really walk away without finding out?" Joseph had no answer to that. They talked for a few more minutes, Martin encouraging him, reminding him of things Joseph had forgotten about himself. When they hung up, Joseph felt slightly less terrified, though the fear was still there, coiled tight in his chest. He sat on the bench for another hour, watching people pass by, living their lives. Young mothers with strollers, businessmen on phone calls, teenagers laughing together, all of them moving forward, taking chances, engaging with life. When had he stopped doing that? When had he decided that survival was enough? The answer was obvious. When Marie died. He had been so focused on getting through each day that he had forgotten to actually live. He had let grief turn him into a ghost, present but not really there, going through motions without meaning. Was that what Marie would have wanted for him? No. She would have wanted him to sing, to find joy again, to honor her memory by living fully, not by hiding. She would have told him to be brave. Joseph stood up from the bench, his decision made. He would do it. He would work with the vocal coach. He would take this insane, impossible chance. He would be terrified every step of the way, but he would do it anyway. Because Martin was right. He could not walk away without finding out what was possible. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to the number Krajicek's assistant had given him. It took him several tries to get the wording right, his fingers clumsy on the small keyboard. Finally, he wrote simply, "I would like to accept Mr. Krajicek's offer. Please let me know the next steps." He stared at the message for a full minute before pressing send. Once it was gone, there was no taking it back. He had committed himself to this path, whatever it might lead to. His phone buzzed almost immediately with a response. The assistant wrote that she would arrange a meeting with a vocal coach named Helena Marak, one of the most respected in the city. The first session would be in 3 days. Joseph walked home slowly, his emotions swinging between excitement and terror. He felt as though he had jumped off a cliff and was still falling, unsure whether there would be something to catch him or whether he would simply crash. That evening, he went to work as usual, pushing his cleaning cart through the empty corridors. But something had changed. When he began to sing, his voice sounded different to his own ears. Stronger, perhaps. More purposeful. He was no longer singing just for himself or for Marie's memory. He was singing for the possibility of something more, something he did not yet understand, but was willing to reach for. In his pocket, the old notebook with song lyrics pressed against his chest like a talisman. Marie had given it to him 20 years ago, encouraging him to write down the songs he loved, to keep them safe. He had carried it ever since, a physical reminder of her belief in him. Now it felt like a promise, a connection between the past and whatever future was coming. Joseph did not know if he would succeed, did not know if he had the talent that Krajicek seemed to believe he possessed. But for the first time in 3 years, he was willing to find out. And that willingness, that small crack in the armor of his grief, felt like the beginning of something. Whether it was the beginning of triumph or heartbreak, he could not yet say. But it was a beginning, and that was more than he had allowed himself in a very long time. Helena Marak's studio was located in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, a space that somehow managed to be both industrial and elegant. High ceilings with exposed beams, brick walls painted white, and enormous windows that let in floods of natural light. A grand piano dominated one corner, and the walls were lined with photographs of performers, some famous, others unknown to Joseph. When he arrived for his first session, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely press the buzzer. Helena answered the door herself, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through him. She was smaller than he expected, barely reaching his shoulder, but she carried herself with an authority that made her seem much larger. "Mr. Novak," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he could not place. "Come in. Richard has told me about you." Joseph stepped inside, feeling immediately out of place among the elegance and artistry of the space. Helena gestured to a chair near the piano and took her own seat on the piano bench, studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You are nervous," she observed. "That is good. People who are not nervous do not care enough about what they are doing." "I have not done anything like this before," Joseph admitted. "I do not know what to expect." "You will sing for me," Helena said simply, "and I will listen. Then we will talk about what I hear and what is possible. That is all." But Joseph could tell it was not all. This woman was going to judge him, assess him, determine whether he was worth the time and investment that Krajicek was offering. The weight of that judgment pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. "Before we begin," Helena said, "tell me why you sing. Not the technical answer, the real answer. Why does it matter to you?" Joseph hesitated, unused to being asked such direct questions about his inner life. "Because it is the only way I can express what I feel," he said finally. "Words are not enough. When I sing, I can say things that I cannot say any other way." Helena nodded, as if this was exactly the answer she had hoped for. "Good," she said. "Technique can be taught. Emotion cannot. If you have the emotion, we can build everything else around it." She stood and moved to the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. "I am going to play some scales," she said. "I want you to match the notes with your voice. Do not think about sounding good. Just focus on matching the pitch. Can you do that?" Joseph nodded, though his throat felt tight with anxiety. Helena played the first note, a middle C, clear and pure. Joseph opened his mouth and tried to match it, but the sound that came out was thin and wavering, nothing like the voice he had when he sang alone in the corridors. Again, Helena said patiently, "And breathe. You cannot sing if you do not breathe." Joseph tried again, forcing himself to take a deep breath first. This time the note was stronger, more confident. "Better," Helena said. Again. They worked through scales for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Joseph's initial terror began to fade, replaced by concentration. Helena was demanding but not unkind, correcting him without judgment, pushing him to do better without making him feel inadequate. When they finished the scales, she had him sing a simple folk song, something he knew well. As he sang, Joseph began to relax, letting the familiar melody carry him. He forgot about being judged, forgot about his fear, and simply sang the way he did when he was alone. When the song ended, Helena sat in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Joseph waited, his heart pounding, certain that she was about to tell him he was wasting everyone's time. "You have a gift, Mr. Novak," she said finally. "A real gift. Your voice is untrained, rough in places, but the foundation is exceptional. The tone, the emotion, the natural resonance. These things cannot be taught. You either have them or you do not. And you have them." Joseph felt a surge of emotion so strong he had to look away. He had not realized how much he needed to hear those words, how much he needed someone with expertise to confirm that he was not foolish to hope. "But," Helena continued, and Joseph's brief moment of joy vanished, "you have developed some bad habits from years of singing without training. You breathe incorrectly, you push from your throat instead of your diaphragm, and your range is limited because you do not know how to access your full voice. All of these things can be fixed, but it will take work. Hard work. Are you willing to do that work?" "Yes," Joseph said immediately. "I am." Helena smiled for the first time, and it transformed her stern face into something warm and encouraging. "Good," she said. "Then we will begin." Over the next weeks, Joseph fell into a new routine. He continued his janitorial work, but 3 afternoons a week he went to Helena's studio for lessons. The work was harder than anything he had imagined. Helena was an exacting teacher, demanding perfection in ways that frustrated and challenged him. She made him repeat simple exercises until his throat ached, correcting tiny flaws in his technique that he could barely perceive. She taught him about breath support, about resonance, about the physical mechanics of singing that he had never considered. Singing, he discovered, was not just about opening your mouth and letting sound out. It was about controlling every muscle, about understanding how air moved through your body, about finding the balance between power and control. Some days Joseph left her studio feeling triumphant, certain that he was improving. Other days he left feeling defeated, convinced that he would never master what she was trying to teach him. But he kept coming back, kept working, kept pushing through the frustration and self-doubt. At the company, word had begun to spread about what was happening. Joseph caught whispers in the corridors, saw people looking at him with curiosity. Mrs. Svoboda asked him about it directly one evening as he passed through the lobby. "Is it true," she asked, her eyes bright with interest, "that Mr. Krajicek is helping you become a singer?" Joseph nodded, still uncomfortable with the attention. "He is giving me lessons," he said. "I do not know what will come of it. That is wonderful, she said warmly. I always thought you had a kind face. I am glad something good is happening for you. Not everyone was so supportive. Joseph overheard 2 younger employees talking in the break room one day, not realizing he was in the storage closet nearby. Can you believe it? One of them said. The janitor thinks he is going to be a singer. At his age. It is pathetic. Krajicek is probably just amusing himself, the other replied. Playing around with the help. It will not lead to anything. Their words stung, confirming Joseph's deepest fears. What if they were right? What if this was just a game, an amusement for a wealthy man who would lose interest once the novelty wore off? What if he was making a fool of himself, reaching for something that was never meant for people like him? That evening, he almost did not go to his lesson, almost called Helena and made an excuse. But then he thought of Marie, of what she would say if she could see him giving up before he had really tried. She would be disappointed. She would tell him that other people's opinions mattered less than his own belief in himself. So he went. And when Helena had him sing a new piece, a classical aria that he had been struggling with for days, something clicked. His voice soared in ways it never had before, hitting notes he had not known he could reach, carrying emotion that came from some deep place he had not accessed before. When he finished, Helena was smiling. There, she said. That is what I knew you could do. That is the voice that has been waiting inside you all along. Joseph felt tears on his cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe this was not foolishness. Maybe this was real. 2 months into his training, Joseph received an unexpected invitation. Krajicek wanted to see him perform, not in Helena's studio, but in front of a small audience. The company was hosting a charity gala, a fundraising event for local arts programs, and Krajicek wanted Joseph to sing during the dinner portion of the evening. Just 2 songs, nothing overwhelming, a chance to see how he handled performing in front of people. Joseph's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing in front of wealthy donors, of being judged by people who probably thought a janitor had no business performing at their event, filled him with terror. But Helena encouraged him, insisting that he was ready, that the only way to truly grow as a performer was to actually perform. You cannot spend your whole life practicing in a studio, she told him. At some point you must step onto the stage and share what you have learned. Music is meant to be heard, Joseph. It is meant to connect with people. But what if I fail? Joseph asked, the familiar fear rising. What if I forget the words or my voice cracks or people laugh? Then you will have failed once, Helena said calmly, and you will learn from it and do better the next time. But I do not think you will fail. I think you will surprise yourself. The weeks leading up to the gala were torture. Joseph practiced obsessively, going over the 2 songs until he could sing them in his sleep. He had chosen pieces carefully with Helena's guidance, 1 classical aria and 1 traditional folk song, something that would showcase both his technical improvement and his natural emotional depth. At night, he lay awake imagining all the ways the performance could go wrong. He saw himself freezing on stage, saw the audience's polite embarrassment, saw Krajicek's disappointment. The visions were so vivid that they felt like premonitions, warnings of disaster to come. His brother Martin called him the week before the gala, checking in. "How are you holding up?" Martin asked. "I am terrified," Joseph admitted. "I do not think I can do this." "Yes, you can," Martin said firmly. You have been training for months. Helena says you are ready. Krajicek believes in you. The only person who does not believe in you is you." "I am 55 years old," Joseph said. "I am a janitor singing at a gala for rich people. They are going to look at me and see a joke." "Or," Martin said, "they are going to look at you and see a man with an extraordinary voice who has overcome loss and hardship to pursue his gift." "They are going to see courage, Joseph, not a joke." Joseph wanted to believe him, but doubt was easier, more familiar. He had lived with doubt for so long that it felt like an old friend, comfortable even as it undermined him. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. Joseph stood backstage in a rented tuxedo that Krajicek had insisted on providing, listening to the sounds of the crowd beyond the curtain. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses and silverware. These were not his people. He did not belong in their world. Helena found him pacing nervously behind the curtain. She looked elegant in an evening gown, transformed from the stern teacher he knew in the studio. She took his hands in hers, stilling his restless movement. "Listen to me," she said. "You are going to walk out on that stage, and you are going to sing, not for them, for yourself, for Marie, for everyone who told you that you could not do this. You are going to open your mouth and let that beautiful voice free, and it will not matter what anyone thinks, because you will know that you did it. You took the chance. Do you understand?" Joseph nodded, though he did not feel the certainty her words tried to instill. Then it was time. The master of ceremonies was introducing him, words that Joseph barely heard over the roaring of blood in his ears. Something about an employee whose hidden talent had been discovered, about giving opportunity to unexpected places. Joseph walked onto the stage on legs that felt disconnected from his body. The lights were bright, blinding, and beyond them he could see the audience, hundreds of faces turned toward him. His throat went dry. His hands shook. For a terrible moment, he thought he might turn and run, flee the stage, and never look back. But then he saw Krajicek at a front table, giving him an encouraging nod. And beside him, in his mind, he felt Marie's presence, steady and loving, the way she had always been. The pianist played the opening notes of the aria, and Joseph opened his mouth to sing. The first note came out rough, uncertain. Joseph's heart sank. But then muscle memory took over, all those hours of practice with Helena, and his voice steadied. The second phrase was better, stronger. By the third, he had forgotten about the audience, forgotten about his fear, lost in the music itself. The aria was a lament, a song about loss and longing, and Joseph poured into it all the grief he had carried for 3 years. Every note contained his love for Marie, his sorrow at her absence, his struggle to find meaning in a world without her. He was not performing anymore. He was simply expressing truth, using his voice to say what words never could. When the aria ended, there was a moment of profound silence. Joseph stood frozen, uncertain, and then the applause began. It was not polite charity applause, but something genuine, enthusiastic, people rising from their seats. Joseph stood stunned as the audience gave him a standing ovation, their faces showing not mockery or pity, but genuine appreciation. He managed a small bow, overwhelmed, and then the pianist began the opening of the folk song. This piece was different, lighter, a celebration of life and resilience. Joseph sang it with growing confidence, his voice ringing clear and true. and he could see people in the audience smiling, moved by the simple beauty of the melody. When he finished, the applause was even louder. Joseph bowed again and walked off stage on shaking legs, barely able to process what had just happened. Helena met him in the wings, her stern face split by an enormous smile. "I told you," she said simply. Krajicek found him a few minutes later, as Joseph was trying to calm his racing heart. "That was remarkable," Krajicek said, gripping his shoulder. "You moved people, Joseph. That is what real artistry does." "I was so afraid," Joseph admitted. "I almost could not do it." "But you did," Krajicek said. "And now you know you can." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People approached Joseph during the reception, complimenting him, asking about his background, treating him with a respect he had never experienced. Some of them were the same people who had ignored him when he cleaned their offices, who had never seen him at all. Now they saw him, and it was both gratifying and strange. But not everyone was happy about his success. Later that week, Joseph was called into a meeting with the building manager, a thin man named Vasek, who had always treated the janitorial staff with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Novak," Vasek said without preamble, "we need to discuss your position here." Joseph felt his stomach drop. Was this it? Was he being fired for reaching above his station? "There have been complaints," Vasek continued, "from other janitorial staff. They feel that you are receiving preferential treatment, that Mr. Krajicek's interest in you is creating an unfair work environment." "I have not asked for preferential treatment," Joseph said carefully. "I am still doing my job." "Are you?" Vasek asked. "Because I have noticed that you are leaving early several days a week for these singing lessons. That is time away from your responsibilities." "I have arranged my schedule," Joseph said. "All my work is completed. I make up any time I miss." Vasek's expression made it clear he did not believe this. "I am going to be watching you closely, Mr. Novak," he said. "Any lapse in your duties, any complaint from anyone, and we will need to reconsider your employment. Do you understand?" Joseph understood perfectly. Vasek resented him, resented his connection to Krajicek, resented that a mere janitor had found a way out of invisibility. It was a reminder that success bred resentment, that stepping into the light meant casting shadows that others could use against you. That evening, Joseph worked with extra diligence, making sure every floor was spotless, every trash can empty, every surface gleaming. He would not give Vasek ammunition to use against him. But as he worked, he felt a new emotion mixing with his familiar anxiety. Anger. Why should he have to apologize for his talent? Why should he make himself small to make others comfortable? He had spent 3 years being invisible, and now that people finally saw him, he was supposed to dim his light so others would not feel threatened? No. Marie would not have wanted that. She would have wanted him to shine as brightly as he could, regardless of what others thought. Joseph pushed his cart through the empty corridors and began to sing, his voice strong and defiant, claiming his right to be heard. 3 months after the gala, Joseph received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a man named Pavel Kearney, who introduced himself as a talent scout for the National Opera House. He had been at the charity gala, had heard Joseph sing, and wanted to meet with him about a possible opportunity. Joseph assumed it was a mistake, a wrong number, something that would evaporate as soon as this Pavel Kearney realized he was talking to a 55-year-old janitor with no formal training. But the man insisted, gave him an address, asked him to come in for a meeting the following week. Joseph told Helena about the call during his next lesson, expecting her to share his skepticism. Instead, her eyes lit up with excitement. "Pavel Kearney is one of the most respected talent scouts in the country," she said. "If he wants to meet with you, Joseph, this is serious. This could be life-changing." "But I am not an opera singer," Joseph protested. "I am a janitor who takes voice lessons. You are a tenor with a rare gift," Helena corrected him. "And you have been training hard for months. You are ready for more than you think." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Joseph took the morning off work, claiming a doctor's appointment, and made his way to the Opera House, a grand old building in the heart of the city that he had passed countless times, but never entered. Inside, it was even more impressive, all gilt and velvet and soaring architecture that spoke of culture and history and a world Joseph had never belonged to. Pavel Kearney met him in a small office backstage. He was younger than Joseph expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an energy that filled the room. "Mr. Novak," he said, shaking Joseph's hand firmly, "thank you for coming. I will be direct with you because I think you appreciate honesty. I heard you sing at the gala, and I was stunned. That voice, that emotional depth, it is exactly what we have been looking for." "Looking for?" Joseph repeated, confused. "For what?" "We are mounting a new production next season," Kearney explained. "A modern opera about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. One of the lead roles is a man not unlike yourself, someone overlooked by society who finds his voice late in life. When I heard you sing, I knew you were perfect for the part." Joseph stared at him, certain he had misheard. "You want me to be in an opera?" "Not just any opera," Kearney said. "This is a major production. It will run for 6 weeks, full orchestra, professional cast. And I want you to audition for one of the lead roles." "This is insane," Joseph said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I am not a professional. I have never been on a real stage. I am a janitor." "You are a singer," Kearney corrected him gently. "With proper training and direction, you could be extraordinary in this role. But I need to be honest with you about what this would require. If you get the part, and I believe you will, you would need to commit fully. Rehearsals would be daily for 3 months. You could not keep your current job. This would have to become your life." Joseph felt dizzy. Give up his job? The steady paycheck that kept him housed and fed? The security he had clung to since Marie's death? It was impossible. He could not take that kind of risk. "I can see you are overwhelmed," Kearney said. "I am not asking you to decide today. The auditions are not for another month. Think about it. Talk to people you trust." "But Joseph, opportunities like this do not come along often, especially not for people our age. If you walk away from this without trying, you will always wonder what might have been." Joseph left the opera house in a state of shock. He walked for hours through the city, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears. This was beyond anything he had imagined. Singing at a charity gala was one thing. That had been a moment, a single performance with no real consequences. But this? This was asking him to rebuild his entire life around a dream he had thought was long dead. That evening, he called Martin. His brother listened to the whole story without interrupting, and when Joseph finished, there was a long silence. "Martin," Joseph said finally, Tell me I am not crazy to even consider this." "You would be crazy not to consider it," Martin said. "Joseph, this is the chance of a lifetime. How many people get this kind of opportunity, at any age, let alone at 55? "But what if I fail?" Joseph asked. "What if I quit my job and then do not get the part? Or what if I get the part and I am terrible? What if I lose everything and end up with nothing?" "Those are all possibilities," Martin admitted. "But Joseph, what if you succeed? What if you are brilliant? What if you discover that you were meant for this all along? Can you really live with never knowing?" Joseph had no answer. He went to work that night feeling like he was moving through a dream. Everything looked the same, the familiar corridors and offices, but it all felt different now, as if he was seeing it from a great distance. He thought about spending the rest of his life pushing this cart, mopping these floors, singing only to himself in empty hallways. A month ago, that had seemed like enough, safe and predictable. Now it felt like a prison. But security was not nothing. At his age, with his limited options, giving up a steady job for an uncertain dream was dangerous, possibly stupid. What would he do if it did not work out? How would he survive? He was still wrestling with these questions 2 days later, when Kryachek called him into his office. Joseph climbed to the 30th floor with a sense of foreboding, uncertain what this summons meant. Kryachek was standing by his window when Joseph entered, looking out at the city. He turned and gestured for Joseph to sit. "I heard about Pavel Cherny's offer," Kryachek said without preamble. "Helena told me. I wanted to talk to you before you make your decision." Joseph nodded, waiting. "I am going to tell you something I have never told anyone in this company," Kryachek said. "When I was 25, I had a chance to study at a prestigious business school in Europe. Full scholarship, incredible opportunity. But I was afraid. I had a decent job, a girlfriend I thought I would marry, a comfortable life. The idea of leaving all that, of going to a foreign country and starting over, it terrified me. So I said no." Joseph watched Kryachek's face, seeing something he had never seen there before. Regret. "What happened?" Joseph asked. "I stayed, built a career, eventually started this company," Kryachek said. "From the outside, it looks like I made the right choice. I am successful, wealthy, powerful. But Joseph, I have thought about that decision every single day for 33 years. I have wondered who I might have become if I had been brave enough to take the risk. I have wondered what I might have learned, who I might have met, what doors might have opened. And I will never know, because I chose safety over possibility." He turned to face Joseph directly. "I am not going to tell you what to do," he said. "This is your decision and yours alone. But I will tell you this. You are 55 years old. You have already survived the worst thing that can happen to a person. You lost the love of your life and you kept going. That takes courage, Joseph. Real courage. So I know you have it in you to be brave. The question is whether you will choose to be." Joseph felt tears threatening. "What if I fail?" he whispered. "Then you fail with dignity, knowing you tried," Kryachek said. "But Joseph, what if the real failure is never finding out what you are capable of? What if the real tragedy is spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been?" That conversation echoed in Joseph's mind for days. He talked to Helena, who was unequivocal in her belief that he should audition. He talked to Mrs. Svoboda, who surprised him by saying that she had always known He was meant for something more than cleaning floors. He talked to Mr. Dvorak, the security guard, who told him that the bravest thing a man could do was admit he wanted something and then reach for it. And late at night, alone in his apartment, Joseph talked to Marie. He sat with her photograph, the one on his bedside table that showed her laughing, her eyes bright with joy. He told her about the offer, about his fear, about his inability to decide. And he imagined what she would say. She would tell him to sing. She would tell him that she had not fallen in love with a man who played it safe, but with a man who had the courage to express his heart. She would tell him that hiding his gift was not honoring her memory, but betraying it. She would tell him to be brave. On the morning he had to give his answer to Pavel Kearney, Joseph woke with absolute clarity. He called Kearney and said yes, he would audition. Then he called Vasek and gave his notice, effective in 2 weeks. The building manager sounded delighted to be rid of him, and Joseph felt a strange liberation in that. He was done making himself small for people who did not value him. He spent his last 2 weeks at the company, cleaning with a lightness he had not felt in years. People wished him well, some sincerely, others with barely concealed skepticism. Joseph did not care. He had made his choice. On his final evening, he pushed his cart through the corridors one last time. When he reached the 13th floor, the place where Krajicek had first heard him sing, he stopped. He stood there in the empty hallway and sang one final song, his voice echoing through the building. It was a song of goodbye and gratitude, of endings and beginnings. When he finished, he left his cart in the janitor's closet, hung up his identification badge, and walked out through the front doors of the building for the last time. He did not look back. Whatever came next, failure or success, at least he would know he had tried. At least he would not spend the rest of his life wondering. And in that moment, walking into the uncertain future, Joseph felt more alive than he had in years. The audition was scheduled for a Monday morning in late spring. Joseph had spent the previous month preparing with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Helena had increased their sessions to 5 days a week, working him harder than ever before. She taught him not just the songs, but the acting, the movement, the presence required for stage performance. "You are no longer singing in an empty corridor," she reminded him constantly. "You must own the space. You must command attention. You must make the audience believe in the character, not just admire the voice." Joseph had never thought of himself as an actor. The idea of becoming someone else, of inhabiting a role, felt foreign and uncomfortable. But Helena insisted that opera was not just about singing beautiful notes. It was about telling stories, about conveying emotion through every gesture and expression. The role Joseph was auditioning for was that of a man named Thomas, a factory worker who discovers late in life that he has a gift for music. The parallels to Joseph's own story were almost painful. He understood this character in ways he had never understood anything, felt his struggles and doubts as if they were his own. Because they were his own. The night before the audition, Joseph could not sleep. He lay in bed, running through the songs in his mind, hearing every note, every phrase, terrified that he would forget something crucial. At 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and made himself tea, sitting at his small kitchen table and staring at Marie's photograph. "I wish you were here," he whispered to her image. "I wish you could tell me I am doing the right thing." But Marie could not answer, and Joseph was left alone with his fear and his hope, the two emotions so intertwined he could not tell them apart. When dawn finally came, He showered and dressed with care. He had purchased new clothes for the audition, simple but respectable, and he checked his reflection multiple times, seeing a man who looked both older and younger than his years, older in the lines etched by loss, younger in the hope that had rekindled in his eyes. The opera house felt different on this morning, more imposing, more real. Joseph entered through the stage door as instructed and was met by an assistant who led him to a waiting area backstage. 4 other men were already there, all auditioning for the same role. They were younger than Joseph, probably in their 30s or early 40s, and they had the look of professional performers. They chatted easily with each other, comfortable in this environment in ways Joseph would never be. He sat apart from them, his hands folded in his lap, trying to quiet the storm of anxiety in his chest. One of the other performers, a man with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes, noticed Joseph's isolation and moved to sit beside him. "First time auditioning for opera?" he asked gently. Joseph nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," the man admitted with a smile. "I am David. I have been doing this for 15 years, and I still get nervous before auditions." "Really?" Joseph asked, surprised. "You look so calm." "That is just years of practice at hiding it," David said. "Inside, I am terrified they will realize I have no idea what I am doing and throw me out." They talked for a few minutes, David offering tips about the audition process, what the panel would be looking for, how to handle nerves. His kindness helped Joseph feel slightly less alone, slightly less like an imposter. Then the assistant called the first name, and one of the younger men stood and walked toward the stage with confident strides. The wait was torture. Joseph listened as each performer took their turn, hearing muffled voices and piano music through the walls. Some sang for what seemed like a long time. Others were done quickly, emerging with expressions that ranged from satisfied to devastated. When David's name was called, he gave Joseph an encouraging pat on the shoulder. "You will do great," he said. "Just remember to breathe." Then Joseph was alone. The last one, waiting. He wondered if that was a bad sign, if they had already found who they wanted and were just going through the motions with him. The assistant appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Novak," she said. "They are ready for you." Joseph stood on legs that felt boneless. He followed the assistant through narrow corridors, and suddenly he was standing in the wings, looking out at the vast, empty auditorium. On the stage was a single chair and a piano. At a table in the center of the auditorium sat 4 people, their faces shadowed by the stage lights. One of them was Pavel Kearney. "Mr. Novak," a woman's voice called from the darkness. "Please come to center stage." Joseph walked out onto the stage, the lights blinding after the dimness backstage. He could barely see the panel, just silhouettes, which somehow made it worse. He felt exposed, vulnerable, every flaw visible under the harsh illumination. "I am Irena Novotna," the woman's voice said. "I am the director of this production. Thank you for coming. We have your materials. I see you will be singing an excerpt from Act 2. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Joseph managed to say, his voice sounding strange and small in the huge space. "And I understand you have no formal training in opera, is that right?" "No formal training," Joseph confirmed. "I have been working with Helena Marak for several months." "Ah, Helena," another voice said, male this time. "She only takes students she believes in. That is a good sign. Before you sing," the director said, "tell us why you want this role. What draws you to Thomas? Joseph hesitated. He had not expected questions, only singing. But then he thought of what Helena had taught him about honesty, about bringing his whole self to the performance. I understand him, Joseph said slowly. I know what it is like to have a gift and be afraid to share it, to feel invisible, overlooked, too old, and too late. I know what it is like to lose everything and have to find a reason to keep going. Thomas's story is my story, and if I can tell it honestly, maybe it will help someone else who feels the way I did feel, the way I sometimes still feel. There was a moment of silence from the panel. Then the director spoke again, her voice warmer. Thank you for that honesty, Mr. Novak. Please, sing for us. The pianist began the introduction. Joseph closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself, and then he began to sing. The piece was a lament, Thomas mourning the years he had wasted, the dreams he had abandoned, the life he might have lived if he had been braver. Joseph did not have to act. He simply opened his mouth and let out all the grief and regret he had carried for so long. Every note contained his love for Marie, his sorrow at her loss, his fear that he had waited too long to reclaim his life. He sang with every ounce of skill Helena had taught him, but more importantly, he sang with absolute truth. This was not a performance. This was confession, catharsis, a man laying bare his soul for strangers to witness. When he finished, his face was wet with tears he had not realized he was shedding. The auditorium was completely silent. Joseph stood frozen, uncertain, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake, if he had revealed too much, been too raw, too unpolished. Then the director stood. She walked down the aisle until she was standing in the light where Joseph could see her. She was a woman in her 60s, elegant and composed, but her eyes were bright with emotion. That was remarkable, she said quietly. Mr. Novak, I have been directing opera for 30 years, and I have rarely heard anything so honest, so moving. You do not sing like a trained professional. You sing like a man who has lived the words he is singing. And that is something that cannot be taught. Joseph did not know what to say. Thank you, he managed. We will be in touch within a week with our decision, she said. But I want you to know that you have given us much to consider. Joseph nodded and walked off stage on shaking legs. The assistant led him back through the corridors and out the stage door into the bright afternoon. He stood blinking in the sunlight, disoriented, feeling as though he had left something vital on that stage. He had no idea if he had done well or poorly, had no sense of whether his performance had been enough. The emotional vulnerability he had shown might have been powerful or it might have been embarrassing. Too much, too uncontrolled. He would not know until they called. The next 6 days were the longest of Joseph's life. He tried to keep himself occupied, but everything felt hollow, meaningless. He had no job to go to, no routine to structure his days. He was suspended in a limbo between his old life and a possible new one, belonging to neither. Helena tried to reassure him. You did beautifully, she insisted when he went to see her. I know you did. But I do not know if beautiful is enough, Joseph said. The others were professionals. They knew what they were doing. You knew what you were doing too, Helena said. You told the truth. That matters more than technique. Martin called every day, checking in, offering encouragement. Krajicek sent a brief text saying simply that he was proud of Joseph, regardless of the outcome. Even Mrs. Svoboda, who Joseph had not spoken to since leaving the company, somehow got his number and called to wish him well. But the support, while appreciated, could not quiet the voice in Joseph's head that insisted he had been foolish, that he had thrown away security for a fantasy, that he would end up with nothing. On the 6th day, his phone rang. Unknown number. Joseph stared at it for 3 rings before answering, his hand shaking. "Mr. Novak," a familiar voice said. "This is Irina Novotna. I am calling with news about the audition." Joseph could not breathe, could not speak. "Yes," he finally managed. "We have made our decision," she said, and Joseph braced himself for disappointment, for the kind rejection that would confirm all his fears. "Mr. Novak," she continued, "we would like to offer you the role of Thomas. If you are still interested, the part is yours." Joseph sat down heavily on his couch, certain he had misheard. "I am sorry," he said. "Could you repeat that?" "You got the part," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "We were unanimous. Your performance was everything we hoped for, and more. We begin rehearsals in 2 weeks. Are you available?" "Yes," Joseph said, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. "Yes, I am available." "Excellent," she said. "My assistant will send you all the details. Welcome to the company, Mr. Novak. We are thrilled to have you." When she hung up, Joseph sat motionless for a long moment, the phone still pressed to his ear. Then slowly, the reality sank in. He had done it. He had auditioned and succeeded. He was going to be in an opera, a professional production. At 55 years old, after a lifetime of playing it safe, after years of grief and invisibility, he was going to step onto a stage and sing. Joseph looked at Marie's photograph and felt a surge of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. "I did it," he told her. "I was brave. I took the chance." And it worked. He wished more than anything that she could be here to see it, to share in this impossible triumph. But in a way, she was here. She had always been here, in his heart, in his voice, in the courage she had helped him find. The tears came then. Not tears of sadness, but of relief and joy and gratitude. Joseph cried for everything he had lost and everything he had found, for the journey that had brought him to this moment. And when the tears finally stopped, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if he had set down a weight he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it was there. There was still so much ahead, so many challenges, so many ways this could still go wrong. But for now, in this moment, Joseph allowed himself to simply feel happy, to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for second chances after. All rehearsals began on a Monday morning in early summer. Joseph arrived at the opera house an hour early, unable to contain his nervous energy. The stage door guard recognized him now, greeted him with a friendly nod, and directed him to the rehearsal hall. Inside, the cast was already gathering, professional performers who moved with easy confidence through this world that still felt foreign to Joseph. The director, Irena, called everyone to attention and began with introductions. Joseph learned that he would be working alongside some of the most respected opera singers in the country. His co-lead was a woman named Anna, a soprano with 20 years of experience and a voice that could shatter glass. When she shook his hand, her grip was firm, but her eyes were assessing, clearly wondering what this untrained newcomer was doing in a lead role. The first week was overwhelming. Joseph struggled to learn the blocking, the stage movements that had to be precise and coordinated. He bumped into other performers, missed his marks, forgot where he was supposed to stand. The others had done this hundreds of times. For them, it was second nature. For Joseph, it was like learning a new language while everyone around him spoke fluently. And there were the songs. So many songs. Joseph had learned the pieces for his audition, but that was only a fraction of what the role required. He had entire arias to memorize, duets to coordinate, ensemble pieces where he had to blend his voice with others while hitting exact timing. He took his script home every night and stayed up late, going over lines and music until his eyes burned and his voice grew hoarse. Helena came to watch several rehearsals, offering notes and encouragement. "You are doing well," she told him after a particularly difficult session. "You are learning faster than you think." "I feel like I am drowning," Joseph admitted. "Everyone else knows what they are doing, and I am just trying not to embarrass myself." "That feeling is normal," Helena said. "Every performer feels it, especially at the beginning. But Joseph, you have something they do not have. You have authenticity. When you sing Thomas's songs, you are not acting. You are living them. That will shine through." Joseph wanted to believe her, but doubt was constant companion. He saw the way some of the other cast members looked at him, with skepticism or barely concealed resentment. He heard the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. He knew what they were saying, that he had not earned this role, that he was only here because of his connection to Kryachek, that he was a charity case who would drag down the production. One afternoon during a break, he overheard Anna talking to another performer in the hallway. "I do not understand why Irena cast him," Anna said, her voice carrying. "He has no training, no experience. This is a professional production, not a feel-good story about a janitor who can sing. He is going to be a disaster." "Maybe she sees something we do not," the other performer suggested. "Or maybe she made a mistake," Anna replied, "and we are all going to pay for it when the reviews come out." Joseph stood frozen, the words landing like physical blows. All his fears, all his doubts, confirmed by people who actually knew what they were talking about. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was a disaster waiting to happen. That evening he called Martin, his voice shaking. "I cannot do this," he said. "I thought I could, but I cannot. They all think I am going to fail, and they are probably right." "What happened?" Martin asked. Joseph told him about the overheard conversation, about his struggles with the blocking and choreography, about feeling like an imposter among real professionals. When he finished, Martin was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember when you were 12? Martin said finally. "And you wanted to sing in the church talent show, but you were too afraid." Joseph remembered. He had practiced for weeks, but had backed out at the last moment, too terrified to get on stage. "You cried all night," Martin continued. "Said you were a coward, that you would never be brave. Do you remember what happened next?" Joseph did remember. Their mother had sat with him and told him that bravery was not the absence of fear. It was doing the thing you were afraid of anyway. "The next year you tried again," Martin said, "and you sang, and you were brilliant. You have always been brave, Joseph. You just forget sometimes." "But I was 12 then," Joseph said. "I had my whole life ahead of me. Now I am 55, and if I fail, it is over." "You are 55, and if you quit, it is over," Martin corrected him. "If you fail, at least you tried. At least you will know. But if you walk away now, you will never forgive yourself." Joseph knew his brother was right. He had come too far, risked too much, to give up now because some people doubted him. Their doubt did not matter. Only his own belief mattered. The next day he arrived at rehearsal early and asked Irena if he could work with her privately on the blocking. She agreed without hesitation, and for an hour before the others arrived, she walked him through the movements slowly, patiently, until they began to feel natural. When the full cast assembled, Joseph performed better than he had before. Not perfectly, but better, and he saw Irena smile. Over the following weeks, something began to shift. The movements became more familiar. The songs settled into his memory. He started to anticipate his cues, to feel the rhythm of the production. He was still not as polished as the others, still made mistakes they would never make. But he was improving, and his voice, his raw emotional honesty when he sang, began to win over even the skeptics. Opening night arrived with the weight of inevitability. 3 months of rehearsals, countless hours of practice, all leading to this single evening when everything would be tested. Joseph woke that morning with his stomach in knots, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. He spent the day trying to distract himself, but nothing worked. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness until finally it was time to go to the theater. The opera house was transformed for opening night. The lobby was filled with well-dressed patrons, the chandeliers blazing, everything polished and perfect. Joseph entered through the stage door, grateful to avoid the crowd, and made his way to his dressing room. It was small but private, his name on a card outside the door. Joseph Novak. He stared at it for a long moment, still unable to believe this was real. Inside, his costume waited on a hanger, simple workers' clothes for the first act, slightly nicer for the second, and for the finale. A suit that represented Thomas's transformation. Joseph dressed slowly, his hands shaking as he buttoned the shirt. There was a knock on his door, and Anna appeared. She looked stunning in her costume, every inch the professional. "I wanted to wish you luck," she said, and her voice was genuine, warm, in a way it had not been during early rehearsals. "You have worked hard, Joseph. You have earned your place here." "Thank you," Joseph said, surprised and touched by her words. "I know I was skeptical at first," Anna admitted. "But watching you these past months, seeing how much you have grown, how deeply you feel this role, I was wrong to doubt you. You are going to be wonderful tonight." She left before Joseph could respond, and he felt a surge of gratitude for her generosity. The company had started as strangers, some of them resentful of his presence, but over the weeks of working together, they had become something like a family. They had seen his struggles, his determination, his refusal to give up, and slowly they had come to respect him. An hour before curtain, Irena gathered the entire cast on stage for final words. "This is a special production," she said, looking around at all of them. "We have worked hard to create something meaningful, something that speaks to the human experience of finding purpose and voice. Tonight we share that with an audience. Trust your preparation, trust each other, and trust that what we have built together is worth sharing." Joseph stood with the others, feeling the solidarity of the group, the shared nervous energy. Whatever happened tonight, they would face it together. The call came for places. Joseph made his way to the wings, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see the audience filing in, the seats filling rapidly. Somewhere out there were Martin and Helena, Krajicek and Mrs. Svoboda, people who had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. The house lights dimmed. The audience settled into expectant silence. The orchestra began the overture, the music swelling through the theatre. Joseph closed his eyes and thought of Marie. "I am doing this for both of us," he told her silently, "for the life we had and the dreams we shared. Watch over me tonight." The curtain rose, the stage lights came up, and Joseph walked out into the brightness, into the story, into the role he had worked so hard to inhabit. The first act passed in a blur of concentration and adrenaline. Joseph hit his marks, delivered his lines, sang with everything he had. The other performers were brilliant around him, supporting him, guiding him through the intricate choreography of the production. When he sang his first major aria, a song about Thomas's realization that his life has been wasted in silence, Joseph felt the audience lean in, felt their attention lock onto him. He was no longer Joseph the janitor, Joseph the widower, Joseph the man afraid of his own dreams. He was Thomas, and Thomas's pain was his pain. Thomas's longing was his longing. The applause after the aria was thunderous. Joseph barely heard it, too deep in the character, too focused on what came next. The first act ended with Thomas making the decision to pursue his music despite the cost. And as the curtain fell, Joseph was shaking with the intensity of the performance. Intermission passed too quickly. Joseph stayed in his dressing room, maintaining his focus, not allowing himself to think about anything except the work still ahead. The second act was even more demanding, the emotional stakes higher, the music more complex. There was a duet with Anna where their voices had to blend perfectly, a moment of connection between two characters who understood each other's struggles. They had practiced it dozens of times, but tonight it felt different, real, as if they were discovering the music for the first time. And then came the finale, the moment Joseph had been preparing for since he accepted the role. Thomas's final aria, the culmination of his journey, a song about finding redemption through art, about learning that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. Joseph stood alone on stage, the spotlight on him, the orchestra building beneath his voice. He opened his mouth and sang with every ounce of skill Helena had taught him, with every bit of emotion he had learned from loss and grief, with all the hope that had been rekindled in him over these transformative months. His voice soared through the theatre, clear and powerful and heartbreakingly honest. He was not performing anymore. He was simply being, purely and completely himself, offering his truth to strangers who had come to witness art. When the final note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Joseph stood, frozen, uncertain, the stage lights blinding him. Then the applause began. It started as a ripple in the front rows and then spread through the entire theatre like a wave, people rising to their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that shook the chandeliers. Joseph stood on stage, blinking in the lights, overwhelmed by the sound of 1,000 hands coming together. The other cast members joined him for the curtain call, each taking their bows to warm applause. But when Joseph stepped forward, alone, the audience roared. They were not just clapping politely for a competent performance. They were celebrating something more, something that transcended technique and training. They were honoring courage, transformation, the triumph of spirit over circumstance. Joseph bowed deeply, his eyes wet with tears he did not try to hide. When he looked out into the audience, he could see faces moved by what they had witnessed, handkerchiefs dabbing at eyes, smiles of genuine joy. Somewhere in that crowd were the people who had believed in him, who had helped him reach this impossible moment. The curtain fell, and the cast erupted in cheers. Anna hugged him fiercely, other performers clapping him on the back, all of them sharing in the triumph. Irena appeared backstage, her face radiant. "That was extraordinary," she said, gripping Joseph's shoulders. "You were extraordinary. Everything I hoped for, and more." Joseph could not speak, could only nod as emotion overwhelmed him. 3 months ago, he had been a janitor singing to empty corridors. Tonight he had stood on one of the most prestigious stages in the country and moved an audience to their feet. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that he could barely comprehend it. The dressing room filled with well-wishers. Martin appeared first, crushing Joseph in a hug, both of them crying openly. "I am so proud of you," Martin said. "Marie would be so proud." Helena was next, her stern teacher's face soft with satisfaction. "You did exactly what I knew you could do," she said. "You trusted yourself. You let your gift shine. That is all any artist can do." Krajicek came backstage as well, looking pleased in his quiet way. "I told you that voice deserved to be heard," he said. "Thank you for proving me right. Thank you for hearing me in the first place," Joseph replied, "for giving me the chance." "You gave yourself the chance," Krajicek corrected. "I just opened a door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." Even Mrs. Svoboda appeared, having taken the evening off to attend. She hugged Joseph and told him she had known all along that he was special, that she had seen it in his eyes even when he was pushing that cleaning cart through the lobby. The reviews appeared the next morning, and they were spectacular. Critics praised Joseph's raw, emotional honesty, his powerful voice, his ability to convey deep feeling through music. One reviewer wrote that watching him was like witnessing the birth of an artist, that his performance reminded audiences why opera mattered, why art mattered, why stories of transformation and redemption would always resonate. Not all the feedback was positive. Some critics noted his technical limitations, his occasional imprecision, the rough edges that training had not completely smoothed. But even these critics acknowledged that his performance had something intangible and precious, an authenticity that more polished performers sometimes lacked. The production ran for 6 weeks as planned, playing to sold-out houses every night. Joseph performed the role 42 times, and each performance was different, each one teaching him something new about the character and about himself. He grew more confident with each show, more comfortable on stage, more able to connect with audiences in that mysterious way that separated good performers from great ones. When the final performance ended, Joseph felt both relief and sadness. The run had been exhausting, demanding more from him physically and emotionally than anything he had ever done. But it had also been the most fulfilling experience of his life. He had discovered capacities in himself he never knew existed. He had proven that age was not a barrier to new beginnings, that loss did not have to be the end of the story, that dreams deferred were not the same as dreams denied. After the closing night party, Joseph walked home alone through the quiet city streets. It was late, past midnight, the same time he used to finish his janitorial shifts. But everything was different now. He was different. The production had ended, but his life as a performer was just beginning. Pavel Kearney had already approached him about other roles, other opportunities. Helena wanted to continue working with him, developing his voice further. And Joseph found himself wanting these things, reaching for them without fear, embracing a future he had never imagined. When he reached his apartment, he sat down with Marie's photograph as he had so many times before. But tonight, the conversation was different. "I did it," he told her. "I was afraid every step of the way, but I did it anyway. I found my voice again. I found myself again." He could almost hear her response, feel her pride and joy. She had always known he was capable of extraordinary things. She had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. And though she was not here to see his triumph, Joseph felt her presence in every note he sang, every moment of courage he found. The next morning, Joseph woke to his phone ringing. It was Irena, calling with news. There was interest in remounting the production in other cities, possibly even taking it on a small tour. Would he be interested in continuing with the role? Joseph thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before saying yes. He thought about the janitor he had been, invisible and silent, going through the motions of life without truly living. That man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that it was never too late to change, to grow, to become who you were always meant to be. He thought about all the people who had helped him along the way, who had seen his potential when he could not, who had offered chances and encouragement and belief. He owed it to them to keep going, to see how far this unexpected journey might take him. But most of all, he owed it to himself. He had spent 3 years hiding from life, protecting himself from more pain by refusing to want anything, to hope for anything. He had learned that safety was not the same as happiness, that existing was not the same as living. Marie had loved him for his courage, for his willingness to express his heart through music. Honoring her memory meant continuing to be that man, continuing to sing, continuing to reach for beauty and meaning, even when it was difficult. Joseph looked out his window at the city awakening to a new day. Somewhere out there were people who felt invisible, who had given up on their dreams, who believed it was too late to change their lives. His story proved otherwise. It proved that one moment, one chance encounter, one decision to be brave could alter everything. It proved that gifts long buried could be excavated and polished until they shone. It proved that endings could become beginnings if you had the courage to step into the unknown. Joseph picked up his phone and called Helena. When she answered, he said simply, "I am ready to keep working. I want to see how good I can become." Her delighted laugh told him everything he needed to know. They scheduled a session for that afternoon, and Joseph spent the morning reviewing music, his voice filling the small apartment with sound. He was no longer afraid of being heard. He was no longer hiding his gift. He was a singer now, claimed and owned, and whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage that had brought him this far. In the kitchen, Marie's photograph caught the morning light. Joseph walked over and touched the frame gently. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me, for teaching me to be brave, for loving me enough to want me to live fully, even after you were gone." And then Joseph Novak, former janitor, current opera singer, man who had learned that it is never too late for transformation, began to sing. His voice rose clear and strong, filling the space with beauty, carrying hope into the world. It was a sound that deserved to be heard, a gift that deserved to be shared. And finally, after all these years, Joseph was ready to share it.